David Miller used to believe his life was the kind that other people envied. At 35, he had carved out a respectable career as an architect in Chicago, known for his clean, modern designs that dotted the skyline of the city he loved. His house, a sleek two-story he'd personally remodeled, stood as both a portfolio piece and a home. Inside it, his wife Amanda made everything feel warm, lived in, complete. She was dazzling in a way that never seemed to fade, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room, and yet always managed to make David feel like he was the only one she truly saw. On weekends, they hosted friends in their backyard, grilling steaks and sipping bourbon late into the night. People would joke that David and Amanda were the golden couple, the ones who had figured out the secret formula to a happy marriage. Amanda's laugh carried through every gathering like music, and David often caught himself looking at her across the patio, thinking, "This is it. This is everything I ever wanted." But what no one saw, what David himself refused to see, were the cracks forming beneath the glossy surface. Amanda had always been ambitious, restless, someone who thrived on attention. At first, it was little things, lingering glances at parties, a hand on someone's arm that lasted a beat too long. David brushed it off as harmless charm. That was just Amanda, he told himself. She loved people, and people loved her back. Then came the late nights at work. Amanda had started a marketing job downtown, one that demanded long hours and frequent client dinners. She would text him at the last minute, apologizing that she wouldn't make it home until after midnight. Sometimes she didn't come home at all, claiming exhaustion and an early start the next morning. David wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. After all, wasn't trust the foundation of marriage? But small doubts began to creep in. A whiff of unfamiliar cologne clung to his jacket one evening after Amanda draped it over her shoulders at a company party. A credit card bill revealed charges from a hotel across town, charges Amanda dismissed with a quick laugh and a breezy, "Oh, that must have been a client meeting. Don't worry about it." And then there were the nights she came home distracted, her phone buzzing non-stop until she silenced it and turned it face down on the counter. David tried to push the unease aside. He worked harder, convincing himself that the late nights and distance were just part of building careers, of growing up. Marriage wasn't supposed to be perfect all the time. Everyone went through rough patches, right? Still, there were moments that gnawed at him. He remembered one Sunday morning, sitting at their kitchen island with a cup of coffee, watching Amanda laugh at something on her phone. When he asked what was so funny, she quickly locked the screen and kissed his cheek, changing the subject. It was such a small thing, but in that instant, David felt the ground shift beneath him. Friends noticed changes too. His best friend from work, Michael, once asked quietly, "Everything good with you too? She seems different lately." David had laughed it off, insisting they were fine, but deep down, the question hit a nerve. The truth was, he was afraid. Afraid to confront Amanda, afraid to hear an answer he couldn't live with. So he clung to the image of perfection, the golden couple everyone admired. He smiled at barbecues, held her hand at family dinners, and told himself that if he just worked harder, loved her more, things would return to the way they used to be. But late at night, lying awake while Amanda's side of the bed stayed empty, David began to wonder if the life he thought he'd built was nothing more than an elaborate illusion. And he was right. Because Amanda's secret, the one she guarded with such skill, was about to come crashing into the open. And when it did, David's perfect life would shatter into pieces sharp enough to cut him to the bone. At first, David convinced himself the changes were normal. Every marriage goes through phases, he thought. Work stress, long hours, a little distance, it wasn't unusual. But the uneasy feeling in his chest kept growing, a quiet alarm bell he tried desperately to ignore. Amanda had always been magnetic. She knew how to make people laugh, how to keep a conversation alive, how to draw attention without ever seeming like she was trying. David admired that about her. But lately, her charm felt different, sharper, almost practiced. It started with the late nights. Amanda would call around 7 to say she had to stay late at the office. At first, David didn't question it. She was building her career, just like he was. But when staying late became the norm, and when it started to bleed into weekends, doubt began to creep in. One night, David made her favorite dinner, rosemary chicken with roasted vegetables, and waited. By 10 o'clock, the food was cold, and Amanda still hadn't come home. At midnight, she finally walked through the door, her cheeks flushed, her hair a little out of place. "Rough day?" David asked, trying to keep his voice even. Amanda smiled too brightly. "Yeah. Long meeting with a client. I'm exhausted." She kissed him quickly and disappeared upstairs before he could say another word. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But something about her eyes, darting away too fast, refusing to linger, made his stomach twist. Then there was the phone. Amanda had always been glued to it, but lately, she guarded it like a secret. She took it into the bathroom when she showered. She kept it face down on the table. Once, when David picked it up to move it off the couch, she snatched it from his hand with a laugh that sounded too forced. "Don't go snooping, Mr. Miller," she teased. But her grip on the phone was tight, her knuckles pale. The bills raised more questions. A $300 charge at a downtown hotel. A receipt from an expensive restaurant David had never heard of. When he asked, Amanda rolled her eyes. "It was business, David. Do you want me to quit my job so I can sit at home and make sandwiches for you?" The word stung. He dropped the subject, but the seed of suspicion grew roots. And then came the cologne. It was subtle at first, a faint trace of something musky and unfamiliar clinging to his jacket. David had loaned it to Amanda one evening when she complained of being cold on her way out the door. When she returned it the next day, it smelled like someone else. Not her perfume, not his own scent, but something entirely foreign. "Whose cologne is this?" he asked, holding the jacket up. Amanda laughed, tossing her hair back. "You're imagining things. Maybe someone at the office hugged me." "Don't be paranoid." Paranoid. That word echoed in his head long after she walked away. Was he paranoid? Or was he finally seeing what had been there all along? Friends began to notice too. At a dinner party, Amanda was unusually attentive to their neighbor, brushing crumbs off his sleeve, laughing too loudly at his jokes. When David teased her about it later, she snapped, "Oh, please. Don't be so insecure." Her words cut deeper than he admitted. Insecure. Paranoid. Those were the labels she pinned on him whenever he tried to voice concern. Slowly, he stopped asking questions altogether. But inside, the unease grew unbearable. Nights became torture, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of Amanda's key in the lock. Sometimes she came home after midnight, smelling faintly of wine. Other times, she didn't come home at all, texting at dawn with flimsy excuses. "I crashed at Sarah's. Too tired to drive. Client wanted drinks after dinner. I stayed nearby." Each message was a tiny fracture in the life David thought he had built. And yet, he stayed silent. He smiled at barbecues, posed for photos, and told himself he was overthinking. He clung to the image of the golden couple, desperate to believe the story they told the world was still true. But the truth was getting harder to bury. One night, after Amanda slipped into the shower with her phone, David stood in their bedroom, staring at the closed bathroom door. His heart pounded, his hands shook, and for the first time, he let himself whisper the thought that had haunted him for months. "She's lying to me." The words filled the room like smoke, suffocating, undeniable. And David knew, deep down, that the life he thought was unshakable was already crumbling. He just hadn't seen how far it would fall, or how devastating the truth would be when it finally came out. David never planned to come home early that night. In fact, he had stayed late at the office, pushing through blueprints for a new client, trying to distract himself from the gnawing unease that had become his constant companion. But around 9 o'clock, something inside him snapped. He closed his laptop, shoved the papers into his bag, and decided he couldn't spend another lonely evening staring at his desk. The drive home felt strange. His chest was tight, his palms damp against the steering wheel. It wasn't traffic, or fatigue, it was instinct, a primal warning whispering that tonight would not be like the others. When he pulled into the driveway, Amanda's car was already there. For once, she hadn't texted about being late. A small relief washed over him. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe things were finally turning. But as soon as he opened the front door, the relief evaporated. The house was dark, except for the faint glow spilling from the crack beneath the bedroom door. He set his bag down quietly, straining his ears. Muffled voices drifted down the hallway, low, intimate, punctuated by a laugh that froze his blood. Amanda's laugh. He moved forward slowly, each step heavier than the last. His breath caught in his throat, his body trembling as though it already knew the truth. When he reached the bedroom door, he hesitated, his hand hovering above the knob. Part of him wanted to turn around, to retreat into ignorance, to keep the illusion alive just a little longer. But another part, the part that had endured the late nights, the lies, the creeping dread, demanded answers. He pushed the door open. What he saw would burn into his memory for the rest of his life. Amanda was in their bed, his bed, her body tangled with another man's. The world tilted, his vision narrowing as the man turned his head, eyes wide with shock. It was Chris. His best friend from college. The man who had been his groomsman at their wedding. The one who had stood beside him through late-night study sessions, who had shared beers and secrets and dreams. The betrayal hit David like a physical blow. His knees weakened, his breath faltered, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse right there on the carpet. Amanda didn't even scramble to cover herself. She smirked, her eyes flashing with something cruel, almost triumphant. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, "I guess the secret's out." Chris stammered, his face red, reaching for his clothes. "David, I can explain." "Explain?" David's voice cracked, raw and broken. "Explain this? In my house? In my bed?" Chris looked away, shame plastered across his features, but Amanda only leaned back against the pillows, unashamed, her lips curling into a smile. "You'll never leave me," she said coldly. "You're nothing without me." The words sliced deeper than the scene itself. It wasn't just betrayal, it was domination. Amanda wanted him to break, to believe that no matter what she did, he would stay. And for a moment, David felt himself unravel. The room blurred, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. All the years, the love, the sacrifices, it all seemed meaningless in the face of this cruel revelation. But then, something inside him hardened. He looked at Chris, at Amanda, at the wreckage of the life he thought he had built, and he felt a flicker of something new. Not rage. Not despair. Clarity. Without another word, he stepped back, closed the door, and walked away. He heard Amanda's mocking laughter trail after him, but it no longer mattered. Because in that moment, David realized the truth, the woman he loved was gone, maybe she had never been who he thought she was. And his so-called best friend was nothing more than a stranger in disguise. The perfect life he had clung to was shattered. But somewhere, beneath the rubble, a different version of David was beginning to rise. A version who would not let Amanda's cruelty define him. A version who would not stay broken. And though he didn't know it yet, the first step toward reclaiming his dignity had already begun. The days that followed were a blur of forced smiles and hollow reassurances. Emily tried to tell herself that maybe she had overreacted, that maybe the late-night phone calls and unexplained absences had an innocent explanation. But deep down, her gut screamed otherwise. Trust wasn't just fading, it was bleeding out, and she could feel the wound growing deeper by the hour. One Thursday evening, Emily decided she couldn't live with shadows anymore. She asked Chris if he wanted to have dinner together, just the two of them, like old times. He agreed a little too quickly, almost as if eager to prove he was still the attentive husband. They sat across from each other at a cozy Italian restaurant, candlelight flickering between them. The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air, but Emily barely touched her plate. She watched Chris closely, the way his eyes darted toward his phone every time it buzzed, the way his laugh sounded rehearsed when she asked about his day. He had always been a terrible liar, and tonight, he wasn't even trying to hide it well. Finally, Emily leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "Who is she, Chris?" He froze, forked mid-air. "What are you talking about?" he asked, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "Don't insult me," Emily pressed, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her wine glass. "I know you're seeing someone. I just want to hear the truth from you." For a moment, Chris's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes hardened, and Emily saw a flash of something dark, defiance, maybe even cruelty. Then, just as quickly, he softened his expression, reaching across the table to cover her hand. You're imagining things," he said smoothly, his thumb brushing her knuckles. "Work has been crazy, and I know I've been distracted. But there's no one else. You're my wife. My only one." Emily wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the man she had fallen in love with years ago. But as he smiled, she caught a glimpse of a message lighting up his phone, face up on the table. She didn't need to read the full text, just the heart emoji at the end was enough to send her blood boiling. She excused herself to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall, her chest heaving. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced them back. This wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It was about dignity, about survival. She knew she couldn't confront him here, not in public, not when she was outnumbered by his lies. She needed proof, undeniable proof, something that would strip away the layers of deception once and for all. When she returned to the table, she smiled, even laughed at one of his half-hearted jokes. If Chris noticed the shift in her demeanor, he didn't say anything. He thought he had her under control. But Emily wasn't the broken wife anymore, she was the hunter, and Chris was the prey. That night, as they drove home in silence, Emily stared out the window, her mind racing. She would get the truth. She would uncover every secret he thought he could bury. And when she did, there would be no coming back. Because this wasn't just a story of betrayal anymore. This was a countdown, and Chris didn't even know the clock had already started. The following weekend, Emily put her plan into motion. She woke up before sunrise, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Chris was still asleep beside her, his phone resting on the nightstand. For years, she had respected his privacy. But now, privacy felt like a weapon he wielded against her. With trembling hands, she reached for the phone, praying the passcode hadn't changed. To her relief, and horror, it was still the same 4 digits he had always used. Her chest tightened as the screen unlocked, revealing a flood of messages that confirmed what she already suspected. There she was. Amanda. Dozens of texts lit up the screen. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. She'll never know. We're too careful. When are you finally leaving her? Emily scrolled faster, her stomach churning. The intimacy in those messages was worse than any physical act of betrayal, it was emotional treason, proof that Chris had given his heart, not just his body, to another woman. She barely noticed when Chris stirred. What are you doing with my phone? His groggy voice sliced through the silence. Emily's head snapped up. The mask was gone now, her hands were shaking as she held the phone out toward him, screen glowing with evidence. Care to explain this? Chris's eyes widened, then narrowed in anger. You went through my phone, he snapped, sitting up. That's a violation, Emily. A violation? She shot back, her voice breaking. You've been sneaking around with her. Don't you dare make me the villain here. For a moment, the room was suffocating with silence. Then Chris swung his legs out of bed, running his hands through his hair. It's not what you think, he muttered, but the excuse fell flat. Emily laughed bitterly, tears spilling over. Don't bother lying. I saw everything. Every disgusting message. Every promise you made to her that should have been mine. Chris didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his keys from the dresser and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Emily collapsed onto the bed, sobbing into her hands, the weight of betrayal crushing her. But as the hours passed, pain hardened into resolve. She wasn't going to sit here and wait for him to crawl back with another excuse. She needed undeniable proof, something she could use to end this nightmare on her terms. That's when she remembered Amanda's name. Emily had seen enough in those messages to know where the woman worked. If Chris thought his affair would remain in the shadows, he had underestimated her. She wasn't just a wife scorned anymore. She was a woman preparing for war. The next day, Emily drove across town, her knuckles white on the steering wheel as she followed the address she had found tucked away in Amanda's text threads. It was a sleek corporate building, all glass and steel, buzzing with people in sharp suits. She sat in the car for nearly 15 minutes, rehearsing what she might say, before finally forcing herself to step inside. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Amanda Miller," Emily said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. Moments later, Amanda appeared in the lobby. She was younger than Emily had expected, dressed in a fitted blazer and heels that clicked against the tile. Her smile faltered the moment she saw Emily. "Emily," Amanda said cautiously, her eyes flickering with recognition. "So, you know who I am," Emily shot back. "Good. Saves me the introduction." They stepped into a side lounge, where the air felt heavy with tension. Amanda crossed her arms, her confident facade cracking. "Look, whatever Chris told you," Amanda began. Emily cut her off. "Don't. I read the messages. Every single one. I know what's been going on." Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, she looked nervous. "It's not like that." "Not like what?" Emily snapped. "Not like sneaking around with my husband. Not like promising him a future that doesn't belong to you." The younger woman faltered, but then her tone shifted, bitter and defensive. "He told me your marriage was over. That you were just roommates. He said he was staying for appearances." Emily laughed sharply, a sound colder than she'd ever made. "Appearances? We built a life together. A home. He sat across from me every night, looked me in the eye, and pretended nothing was wrong. And you believed him?" Amanda looked down, her facade crumbling. I didn't know it was this serious." Emily leaned in, her voice low but cutting. "Oh, it's serious. You're part of a lie that nearly broke me. But here's the thing, lies don't stay hidden forever. And when this comes out, it won't just ruin him. It'll drag you down with him." Amanda's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then closed it, realizing she had no defense. Emily stood, her pulse racing with both fury and triumph. "You thought you could replace me. But I'm not the one who's going to lose everything. He is. And when he does, you'll just be a footnote in his downfall." As Emily walked out of the building, her hands still trembling, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: power. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about taking back control, and making sure Chris paid the price for every lie. That evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at the neat stack of printouts she had prepared, screenshots of Chris's messages, bank statements showing hotel charges, and now, the memory of Amanda's shaken face burned into her mind. For weeks she had been drowning in his lies, but now the tide had shifted. When Chris finally walked through the door, the air changed. He smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't his usual, his shirt wrinkled from a day that clearly hadn't been spent at the office. He froze when he saw her sitting there, waiting. "We need to talk," Emily said firmly, sliding the stack of papers across the table. Chris's eyes darted to the evidence, then back to her. His jaw clenched. "Where did you get all this?" "From the truth," she replied coldly. "The thing you've been avoiding for months." He sat down heavily, rubbing his face. "Emily, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she snapped. "I went to see her today. Amanda. She knows everything now." Chris's head shot up, his expression darkening. "You what?" "I looked her in the eye and told her what kind of man you really are. She thought you were leaving me, that our marriage was just for show. You lied to her just like you lied to me." For the first time, Chris looked rattled. He slammed his fist against the table, the papers scattering. "You had no right." Emily stood, her voice rising with a raw fury she didn't know she had. "No right? You shattered our marriage, dragged me through hell, and you're worried about rights? The only right I have left is to end this nightmare, and believe me, I will." Chris's face twisted with panic as he realized his carefully crafted facade was crumbling. "If you ruin me, Emily, you'll ruin yourself too. Think about what people will say, what it'll look like." But Emily cut him off, her voice steady and resolute. "I don't care what it looks like. The only person whose opinion ever mattered was mine. And you lost that the moment you chose her over us." For once, Chris had no response. He just sat there, silent, as Emily gathered the scattered papers and tucked them back into the folder. She paused at the doorway, looking back at the man she had once trusted with her whole life. "This is just the beginning. You wanted to play games in the dark. Fine. But I'm about to drag everything into the light." And with that, she walked away, the sound of her heels echoing like a war drum. The trap was set, and soon, the whole world would see Chris for who he truly was. Emily didn't have to wait long for her chance. 2 weeks later, Chris's company was hosting its annual gala, a glittering evening filled with clients, colleagues, and executives who adored him. It was the kind of event he thrived in, the perfect stage for his charm. But this time, Emily had a different role in mind. She arrived in a sleek black dress that turned heads the moment she walked in. Chris was already there, schmoozing near the bar, his arm draped casually around a glass of whiskey. He spotted her across the room, his confident grin faltering when he noticed the folder clutched in her hand. "Emily," he said through gritted teeth when she joined him. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting my husband," she replied sweetly, her eyes cold. "Isn't that what a good wife does?" Before Chris could respond, the CEO tapped his glass, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Let's raise a toast to the incredible work Chris has done this year." Applause rippled through the room. Chris lifted his glass, smiling tightly, until Emily stepped forward. "Actually," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Before we toast, I think everyone should know the kind of man you're really celebrating." The room went still. Chris's face drained of color. "Emily, not here," he hissed. "Oh, especially here," she said, pulling out the papers. "This man you all admire has been living a double life. While he's been dazzling you with his charm, he's been sneaking around with a coworker, lying to his family, and betraying the vows he swore to me." Gasps erupted. The CEO's eyes widened. Amanda, standing near the back, froze like a deer in headlights. Emily flipped through the pages, reading aloud the texts that burned holes in her heart. "When are you leaving her? I can't wait to spend forever with you." Murmurs spread like wildfire. Chris lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers, but Emily pulled back, her voice ringing out. "You told me once that appearances were everything. Well, here's your appearance. Here's the truth, Chris. This is who you really are." The room was chaos now, whispers, stares, colleagues turning their backs. Amanda slipped out the door, her career imploding by association. Chris stood frozen, his carefully curated reputation shattering in an instant. Emily dropped the folder at his feet. You built your life on lies. Now watch it crumble. And with that, she walked out, the sound of her heels echoing louder than the stunned silence she left behind. The morning after the gala, Chris's world collapsed faster than Emily could have imagined. By 9 a.m., his phone was buzzing non-stop, missed calls from his boss, angry voicemails from clients, even texts from colleagues who once praised him but now wanted nothing to do with him. When he finally walked into the office, whispers followed him like a shadow. Amanda's desk sat empty, she had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review. And Chris? He was summoned straight into the corner office of the CEO. Sit down, the CEO said coldly. Do you realize the damage you've done to this company's reputation? To me personally. Chris tried to defend himself. My personal life has nothing to do with work. The CEO slammed a folder onto the desk, the same folder Emily had held the night before. When your personal life explodes in front of half our investors, it becomes everyone's business. You humiliated us. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending termination. Chris staggered out of the office, pale and hollow-eyed. The empire he had built with charm and lies was crumbling, brick by brick. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her kitchen, sipping coffee while her phone lit up with messages of support. Friends she hadn't heard from in years were reaching out, we had no idea what you were going through. You were so brave last night. Even Mike, her oldest friend, showed up at her door with bagels and a hug. You okay? He asked gently, setting down the food. Emily exhaled, the weight of the past years finally lifting. For the first time in a long time. I think I am. Mike smiled, though his eyes were sharp with protective anger. He deserved worse. But you? You deserved so much better. Emily nodded, her gaze drifting to the sunlight spilling across the counter. She wasn't naive, she knew the scars Chris left would take time to heal. But in that moment, surrounded by the quiet support of those who truly cared, she felt something Chris could never give her, peace. And somewhere across town, Chris sat alone in his car, staring at the empty parking lot of the office he'd once ruled, realizing he had lost everything. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life felt strangely quiet. For years, her home had been a battleground of suspicion, lies, and cold silences. Now, with Chris gone, the silence was different, calm, almost soothing. She started small. She cleared out the closet, boxing up Chris's tailored suits and polished shoes, the cologne bottles that carried his scent, the photographs that mocked her with smiles that were never real. Each item she tossed into the donation pile felt like shedding dead weight. By the end of the week, the house no longer felt like his, it felt like hers. Therapy became her anchor. At first, she dreaded opening up, afraid of sounding weak. But the therapist listened without judgment, guiding her through the storm of anger and grief. Betrayal doesn't define you, the therapist said gently one afternoon. But how you rise from it will. Those words stuck with Emily. She began to reconnect with old friends, women she had drifted away from during her marriage because Chris always made her feel guilty for spending time with them. One Friday night, she laughed until her sides hurt over margaritas, realizing just how much of herself she had lost, and how much she was regaining. Mike remained a constant, too. One evening, as they grilled steaks in the backyard, he looked at her with a half-smile. You know, this could have broken you. But you didn't let it. Emily poked at the grill, the firelight flickering against her face. It almost did. But I think I needed to hit rock bottom to realize what really matters. And what's that? Mike asked. She paused, then met his gaze. Respect. For myself. For the people I let into my life. I spent so long trying to fix something that wasn't worth fixing. I'll never make that mistake again. As the months passed, the wounds didn't disappear, but they began to scar over. Emily explored new hobbies, painting, hiking, even yoga, though she laughed at herself more than she meditated. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers again. And then, one rainy afternoon at a coffee shop, something unexpected happened. Emily was sitting alone by the window, sketching in a notebook, when a woman approached with a warm, genuine smile. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from Emily. Emily blinked, then smiled back. "Not at all." They began talking, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt something stir inside her. Not desperation. Not the blind hope that had tethered her to Chris for too long. But a quiet, steady belief that maybe, just maybe, the future could be better. The woman's name was Rachel. She was a graphic designer who had just moved to town after leaving a long-term relationship of her own. What began as small talk over coffee stretched into 2 hours of laughter, stories, and the kind of easy conversation Emily had forgotten was possible. When Rachel finally glanced at her watch, she smiled sheepishly. "I should let you get back to your day. But, would you like to do this again sometime?" Emily hesitated. The old fear stirred, the fear of betrayal, of letting someone too close, too fast. But then she remembered what her therapist had told her, "Don't let the past steal your future." She nodded. "I'd like that." That night, she lay in bed replaying their conversation, surprised by the lightness in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was hope. And that was enough. Meanwhile, across town, Chris's world was unraveling. After his suspension turned into termination, word spread quickly. Former friends avoided him, clients refused to take his calls, and even his own family kept their distance, ashamed of the scandal. Amanda had vanished, cutting ties the moment the fallout began. One night, he sat alone in his darkened apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and empty whiskey bottles. His phone buzzed, a message from an old colleague. For a moment, his heart leapt. But when he opened it, the words made his stomach drop. "You should get help. You've become a cautionary tale." Chris hurled the phone across the room, shattering it against the wall. Rage and regret gnawed at him, but deep down, he knew the truth: he had done this to himself. Back in her own home, Emily wasn't thinking about Chris anymore. She was too busy rediscovering herself, one step at a time. Her life was no longer defined by betrayal. It was defined by resilience, by the choice to heal, and by the courage to believe in tomorrow. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. Emily and Rachel began meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long walks through the park where the leaves had begun to turn. Their conversations stretched late into the evening, ranging from childhood memories to future dreams. Rachel had a warmth, a steadiness that reminded Emily what trust could feel like when it wasn't built on lies. One evening, as they sat on a park bench watching the sun dip below the horizon, Rachel turned to her. "You've been through hell, Emily. But you carry yourself like someone who refuses to let it define her. That's incredible." Emily smiled softly, her eyes misting. "For a long time, I thought the betrayal was all I was. But maybe it was just the beginning of something better." Rachel reached over and took her hand, gently, without pressure, just a quiet offering. Emily didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel not fear, but possibility. Across town, Chris was unraveling completely. With no job, no reputation, and no one left to shield him, he drifted from bar to bar, drowning in bitterness. His savings were dwindling, his apartment a mess of unpaid bills and empty bottles. One night, he stumbled past a cafe and froze when he saw through the window Emily and Rachel, laughing together, their faces lit with the kind of joy he hadn't seen in Emily's eyes for years. For a moment, Chris felt a pang, jealousy, regret, rage all tangled together. But then reality crashed in. That life, that laughter, that peace, it would never belong to him again. He had traded it away for lies and lust, and there was no undoing it. He turned and walked into the night, swallowed by his own mistakes, while Emily leaned closer to Rachel, letting her guard down piece by piece. For Emily, the storm had passed. For Chris, it had only just begun. The divorce was finalized with a court's crisp declaration: the marriage between Paul and Sandra is hereby dissolved. Paul expected to feel liberated, but instead, he felt like he was standing on the ashes of a battlefield where nothing survived intact. Sandra's lawyer shook her hand as if congratulating her on a business deal won. Sandra herself sat tall, her expression unreadable, the same practiced poise she'd worn throughout their collapse. Paul walked out of the courthouse into a bright spring day that felt cruelly indifferent. Freedom didn't taste sweet, it tasted like paper dust and bitterness. His friends congratulated him, told him he'd dodged a bullet, but their words fell flat. He wasn't sure what he'd dodged or what he'd lost. He just knew the story he thought his life would tell was gone. Sandra celebrated quietly with the man who'd been by her side through it all, her affair now legitimized in ways that twisted Paul's stomach. He tried not to care, but late at night, when silence pressed heavy, he'd wonder if she'd ever truly loved him, or if he'd been nothing more than a stepping stone in her carefully constructed life. It wasn't a happy ending, not for either of them. Just a hollow victory where nobody really won, only survived.